You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
For those who are up, I invite you to begin to grab a seat, and if you are new, want to again extend a warm welcome and let you know that this summer, as those who've been around know, we've chosen to take up a focus on hearing wisdom for life, and that's the title of our focus and series this summer. And we've noted that wisdom is different than knowledge or mere information. Information is good, it can be a tool in life, but wisdom is defined as understanding how life really works in the ways that really help us to flourish. You can have a lot of information but not necessarily flourish. To flourish, you kind of need to know, how does life really work? How do I know how to really make the right choices and to do well in life? And that's what wisdom is about. You know, and this is why, in King Solomon of Israel, when he was asked by God, you can have anything. What do you want to ask for? And he said, I want to ask for wisdom, because I know that's what I'll need to do well in life. And that type of wisdom that we often think comes with kind of age, because in life you make observations, you get more perspective, and it does. But it also is something that God can begin to reveal to us, how life works. And so that kind of wisdom was collected in what we know as the biblical book of Proverbs. And that, many believe, was intended to be shared with younger men in particular as kind of a way for them to become a little wiser about life as they began to go forward. And so we're turning to the biblical book of Proverbs to hear this divine wisdom as it speaks to different areas of life. And today we're going to engage the area of work. Wisdom for life's work. Did you hear how silent it got? It's like some of you are going, work. You know that's a four-letter word. And then maybe in your vocabulary it's one of those four-letter words. And you're thinking, what is there wisdom for work? You're like, you can sum it all up. I need a job, I got a job, I resent a job. That's pretty much my life in relationship to work. And you might be thinking, work, I don't want to talk about work here. This is why it's Sunday. I live for Sunday because I don't want to be reminded of Monday, and so why would you bring that up here, and this is why I love worship, because I forget about work, and they're so separate. And you know what God's heart for us is to understand, I think maybe just a beginning point, God doesn't share the separation that we do. We kind of like want to get away from this, and we like to be into that, and we think certain things are more spiritual than others. And God just sees lives that he loves and that he wants to fashion, and he wants them to flourish, and he wants them to understand how to relate to the good gifts of life, of which there's many good gifts. And so God looks and says, no, the part of my love for you is to help you understand how to relate to this whole aspect of life called work. And that actually there's a gift, there's a value in this thing, work, that you can do. I gave you the potential to be a part of creation and to work it, and there's a good part of that. Now, you might say, but it feels often kind of demeaning and vain. God gets that, he knows, but it's not work. It's a broken world separated from him that will begin to work itself out in often demeaning ways, but it's not fundamental to work. So God wants us to understand that I want you to flourish, and there's some good things here. So I've looked through the book of Proverbs and kind of gleaned out some of this divine wisdom that God wants to speak to us about. And I've actually identified, I think, 10 different, from my perspective, summarize these 10 different points. And out of the sake of time, we're just going to fly quickly through 7 of them to identify. The others are there in your notes, and I'll post them if you want to explore even deeper. But I want to move through these 7 really quickly. And here's what I think is going to be helpful to you in thinking about this. And that is, what I find is that there's going to be at least one for each of us that if we're open to it, God will probably kind of go, this relates to your life a little bit. And that would be the point in which I think God wants to speak to you, because sometimes Simple truths strike us differently at different seasons of our life. So the question I want to invite you to ask yourself is, God, I just open myself up to how one of these maybe truths, these insights, maybe is something you are helping me with or could speak to me about my current life right now. Will you do that? Just be open to that. And try to help identify that one or more that would be that. Now let me just note as we dive in that one of the things about proverbial truth that's helpful to remember is that a lot of it is kind of, we might say basic truth, basic wisdom really. And when we say the word basic, we often say, yeah, I already know that. Like it's obvious, or I've heard it before, or it doesn't sound new or novel. Yeah, it doesn't always. It's not always like, wow, I never imagined that truth. But it's that sense that even what is I've heard before doesn't mean I've heeded it. I've realized in life there are things I've heard, so I can say I know them, but my life, is it really fully reflecting, fully getting it? Just because I've heard it doesn't mean I've heeded it. There are things that I've learned as I get older I don't mind going back to. I read through a lot of things where it's like 5 points on this, and it's like, okay, none of them may be new, but I need to hear them again because I just want to, something in there is going to be very timely. So think of it as that, and when you have these short summaries, statements, that proverbial wisdom is, it's kind of a summarize, it's really kind of trying to just say this is the general way life works. It doesn't try to bring the nuances to all the circumstances of life. Of course it isn't, there's lots of other circumstances that mean it's not always going to be just like this, but generally speaking it is. So we have like common proverbial wisdom, right? The early bird catches the... Does he always catch the worm? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure some early bird missed a worm and some late bird got one. That's not really the point, though. In general, the truth is there. So that it's helpful to realize that we're not here trying to go deep. It's trying to say, do you get this fundamental principle? Listen to it that way. And it also means it doesn't qualify itself. It's not here to try to nuance things. So as it speaks to work, we need to understand that we all have different circumstances, different competencies to bring to that. Some people may really have very true limits to the ability to be involved in work now, or you may be retired. It isn't there to try to judge those circumstances. It's there to say these, though, are those general truths. So with that in mind, let's dive in. Let's listen to what God has to maybe say to our particular lives in this season. And the first thing as we look at wisdom for life's work is this, that we need to work hard to provide well. Now, nothing may sound more basic than that. All right, work hard. Like, it pays to work hard. That just seems so incredibly basic. But what runs so deeply through the whole book of wisdom, speaking to our life work, is to understand that if you want to have a life that actually goes well and flourishes, you really need to see the connection between that hard work and that kind of provision. And so we begin here in Proverbs 24 to read this. He looks and he says, I went past the field of the sluggard, past the vineyard of the man who lacks judgment. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I applied my heart to what I observed and learned a lesson from what I saw. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. Here we're introduced to a term that many translations will use throughout the book of Proverbs. It's the sluggard. And a lot of us are going, I'm not quite sure what that is, but I don't think it's good. You know, it's sluggard's like kind of the slug. I mean, as you think of a slug, they kind of move slow. It's kind of a metaphor for the one who's lazy, the slacker. And I got to tell you, just a side, I was reminded when I was in college, and I'm just trying to kind of come back and seriously think of what my life would look like following Jesus, and formed a little community of people. And My roommate at the time, he was at UCSD as an engineering student. And to this day, we're good friends. But we were so different. I mean, we're just really, really different personalities. I mean, he's the most disciplined person I've ever known. And so anytime I'd wake up, he'd already been up for like an hour, studying away. So he would kid me. He'd be in the room, studying, and he would kind of quote some scripture to me as I'm waking up about the sluggard, and the sluggard rises late, and I'm like, this got old, So I prepared one night, and I thought, you know what, I got to be able to be able to respond to that. So I'm looking through the scriptures, and this is so great. So I found a great response. So he says that to me, and I roll over in bed, pull out the scriptures, and read this to him. Whoever blesses his friend with a loud voice rising early in the morning will be counted as cursing. He was so taken back. He goes, whoa! And some of you right now are going, I'm writing that one down. Like, I am so needing that right now, You're not the early riser. But the point that is being made here isn't telling you what time you rise. The point that's being made here is he's looking at life and he's seeing something that is profoundly true. And we just need to kind of put it in front of us. He's saying that if you withdraw into that kind of place of rest, in other words, rest has its place and relaxation has its place. But if you withdraw into that as a state, your life's going to deteriorate. That's what he's saying. That person who just withdraws and kind of makes that just their way of life, that their choice, the way they wish that it could always be, just to kind of hang and not do, and we'll see that life begins to deteriorate, the walls, the weeds. And this is the truth that we really have to face. And it really helps us to understand that it's really a picture of understanding that the easy road, really ultimately becomes the hard road, and the hard road becomes the easy road. That is, the easy road, if you just do what's kind of easy, what's ahead of you? Hard. It's going to be harder. And that the hard road, if you'll do the things that are hard, what's ahead of you? What's ultimately going to be easier. Life will prove to be easier if you kind of do the hard work and then see how the long road leads. And that's what he's kind of recognizing, and he's seeing within himself. And so this is what runs through so deeply the whole of the book. We read in Proverbs 20 where it says, a sluggard does not plow in season, so at harvest time he looks, but finds nothing. In verse 13, don't be too fond of sleep. You'll end up in the poorhouse. Wake up and get up, and there'll be food on the table. Proverbs 10:4, lazy hands make a poor man, but diligent hands bring wealth. You might think, I get that kind of, but what about, hard work can generally bring it, but what about wealth that people just get? It's just kind of handed to them. It seems like that's the way life works, or too often it works that way. But even there, the wisdom of Proverbs, God speaks to in Proverbs 17:2, it says, a wise servant, though, will rule over a disgraceful son, the one who would have inherited things, and will share the inheritance as one of the brothers. And even here, I think it says something that does play out, which is if you become the one who's trustworthy with things, ultimately you will be the one who is trusted with things. And that one who might have had things handed to them but proves untrustworthy will often lose those things. And I've seen this played out, at least within maybe 1 or 2 generations, where the wealth that was kind of just there but nobody seemed to be very responsible, they lose that. And it often ends up in the hands of those who are trustworthy. And so it's calling on this trust, and it's calling us to understand that at the heart of it is this. The hard work is not being told it's a virtue in and of itself. It's being told that hard work is a good thing because it provides well. And so it's really trying to say, if you want to provide well, if you value that, make the connection so that it's not just hard labor in some oppressive way, but labor that can serve flourishing, that can serve developing well. And I know that seems like this isn't very novel, like that's so, it just sounds so flat, like I already know that. Don't we all know this? Not really. Why does God say this so much? Because I don't think God thinks that we're necessarily so clear in ourselves. I think there's another message that's always taunting and very much in our age, which is The best thing, the virtuous thing, is figuring out how to do nothing and make a lot. That's virtuous, And so really, we look upon work in our culture as, yeah, maybe hard work is needed, but more as a vice than it is a virtue. And I think what God's saying, just watch out. It's actually a virtue. It's actually a good thing when it's connected to us in the right ways. When we value providing, it's a good thing. And we live in a culture that can be where we can become easily cynical. We make jokes about work. Everything's negative about work. And what God wants us to hear is that while there's a lot that is demeaning and can be, that in the midst of that, what might seem vain is a value, something to be valued, something virtuous. Hold on to the virtuous side of working hard. That's the heart of what's trying to be said. And if you think that and equate easy with good and hard with bad, because that's what we can do in our culture. Easy's good, hard is bad. If you take that as your equation, you will end up being the fool in the long run. Don't let that be the way you think. Understand it better than that. And so it's not telling us how much we're to work. It doesn't say, hey, therefore I love the 100-hour work week. It's better than the 40. No, it's not saying that. It understands that rest and relaxation are vital, and we're going to talk about it. That's a good part of what God has, but they're meant to be part of the reward. Do you know that you actually enjoy rest and relaxation best when they follow hard work? Not when they're kind of just a state, And this is what God understands, and he's trying to help us to get at. And what he's really trying to say is, I want you to get up and embrace purpose in your life. Have a purposeful life that gets up and engages it. So get up. Don't just kind of check out. Get up and engage with all of your vision, all of your intelligence, all of your strength, all of your skills, everything that God's given you. Bring all that to bear on life and on what you can bring out of it. That's what he's calling out for every life to see. And the truth is, we all can believe that, but it can sometimes be challenging to actually meet that when it comes down to it, when you're just tired, And somebody shared the story of a young kind of teen who he wanted to start, building up, getting bigger, so he wanted to get some weights. And his dad's like, I don't know, I don't know if we can go out and buy you weights. And they argued about it. And one day they're at the sporting goods store, and the kid's going, come on, Dad, I want to get the weights. I promise I'll use them every day. And he goes, that's a huge commitment. He goes, no, I'll do it every day. He goes, that's a huge cost. No, Dad, I'll do it every day. Finally, the dad gets to the end, and he goes, okay, all right. So he shells out the money, and they buy the weights, and he gets to the checkout, and it's time to head to the car. And the little boy is sitting there going, what? You mean I have to carry these to the car? The truth is, none of us embrace laziness in theory, only in practice. None of us would say, I really believe in the lazy life. But it's hard in practice sometimes to actually get up and engage those things. And he's saying, make the connection and embrace that there's something to engage. God's given you purposes, skills, gifts, vision, so go for it. And that leads to the second point here, which is that not only do we need to just overcome the lack of hard work, but also the misguided focus on false work. And that's the second point, which is don't chase fantasies and vain pursuits, which I think is a vital word to us kind of in our time. Listen to the words of Proverbs 12. It says, a hard worker has plenty of food, but a person who chases fantasies has no sense. And very similarly, later in Proverbs 28, it says, a hard worker has plenty of food, but a person who chases fantasies ends up in poverty. And where this uses the term chasing fantasies, other translations, and this can be something it could be translated as, or the word could means vain pursuits or useless projects. And I think that's very helpful when you start to see those terms, because it's saying don't give yourself to things that are kind of vain, that maybe have a lure for you. It's kind of easy street, but in the end, they're really not going to be fruitful. And it's not speaking here about the fact that there can be good investments to make on the side or some creative ways you might seek to make money. It's not looking down on all of those, but I think it's a word of warning to us that there is this temptation that we have, and it's playing itself out a lot in our culture, which is find the silver bullet. Find the way in which you're going to make money without really having to work, It's just amazing, And there's a program, and you can join my program, and I'll show you how to make money without working, Sound good? It's being sold everywhere. Who makes all the money? The guy selling you the program is making all the money, sometimes at your expense. So there's just a lot of this going on, and it's kind of the temptation for the winning lottery ticket. It's the temptation for that small investment that's going to make it big. It's the temptation of gambling. I'm going to take a little bit, and when times are hard and I'm desperate, I'm not going to kind of like wait around and work to get out of the hole. I'm going to take what I got left and go for it because I'm going to pull this off without hard work. All of these things become a temptation, and they can end up destroying life. I have seen so many lives who've been destroyed, or at least temporarily go through hard seasons because they went with that easy street instead of seeing the longer term. And this is why there's this call of wisdom is saying, be careful of this. Don't chase the fantasy. Don't kind of look for that easy way out. As it says in Proverbs 13, wealth from get-rich-quick schemes quickly disappears. Wealth from hard work grows over time. And that phrase, get-rich-quick schemes, obviously in the original language wasn't that. It really meant work or wealth without work. It meant empty. It meant none, without labor. So wealth without work doesn't really prove to be very lasting sometimes. In fact, it can kind of prove to be a very short-term way to approach things. What I think the wisdom is telling us is to understand that at some level, wealth is involved over time. Do you notice what it says? Work over time. So we don't like that. Every one of us goes, I wish I could just somehow have all of my needs for life met instantaneously, and I'd be done with this whole working thing. Saying, you know what, at some level, you're going to develop and meet your needs best if you see that labor does involve time. Be patient. It's kind of a way of life more than a way of a moment. And I think that can be helpful to some of us because we do feel like it's just the, daily grind. Oh my gosh, such a daily grind, It adds up to nothing. It's of no value. And God says, no, it's kind of the way life is. How does God provide for you? Give us our daily bread. Like God doesn't really want all of your life just somehow finished when it comes to, there's a part of life that is getting up and going out. And it's a good thing. It's the way life works. It's how we flourish. This leads to a third point. Number 3, develop your own inner motivation and initiative. Listen to what we read in Proverbs 6. It says, go to the ant, you sluggard. And again, no offense, it's talking to all of us. That sluggard that's in all of us. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has what? No commander, no overseer or ruler. Yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. What is he saying here? He's saying, go look at that unique little creature that it's interesting, but all this time later, the ant is still kind of a marvel. Why? Because it kind of like carries a weight that's so much greater than its own body weight. And it's also, it seems like it's this amazing worker that's always providing. But there's something else about the ant that he's telling us to observe that we now know to be true. When we look at some of the insects like bees, we see these designations, right? There's the worker bee and the queen bee, and one of them is serving the other. They're saying, look at the ants. They're not that way. They're quite different. This is the way one person describes it. It says, there appears to be a total want of subordination in ant life, which is noticeable among bees. The ant has no overseer. There is none to regulate or see that the work is done. Each ant apparently works independently of the rest, though guided by a common instinct to add to the common store. What a profound little way of describing that life of an ant that's saying, go look and be like that. Meaning, what is it saying? Be one who doesn't need your boss to tell you what to do, doesn't need your parent, doesn't need someone else to make you feel guilty. Doesn't need the outside. Be the kind of person who understands that you will relate and flourish best in relationship to life's work when you develop an internal sense of this is why I work. This is why I want to initiate and do things. I don't need to be told, and that's hard. It isn't easy. It's not going to be natural for everyone. Sometimes we're driven by unhealthy things too. This doesn't assume that every drive is good. But what is that drive to be? What does God want us to do? I'd say that ultimately he wants us to discover that we work in relationship to him. And this is what the Apostle Paul would eventually surmise to us. And basically say, if you're one here who's like, I wish I had a different boss, get a new boss. Let it be God. And listen to what he says in Colossians. He says, whatever you do, work as it with all your heart, as working for who? The Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward for your labors and all your work in this world. It is the Lord Christ you're serving. That's a wonderful picture. It doesn't mean go to your boss and say, hey, screw you, I'm out of here. But it does mean that basically, ultimately, deep down, be one who chooses to do life in relationship to him, not merely for secondary people in life. And you will find that that will help you. And you and I can actually operate in life more beautifully like the ant, who isn't being regulated by merely the system or the structure. This is ultimately where we have to say, you know what? Lots of stuff I don't like about work. Lots of stuff I don't like about my work or your work. But there's something there that I do consider to be good and a gift, and I'm going to wake up every day and rise to that. I like how one writer way back in like the Reformation period described this. He said, the maid who sweeps her kitchen is doing the will of God just as much as the monk who prays, not because she may sing a Christian hymn as she sweeps, but because God loves clean floors. The Christian shoemaker does his Christian duty not by putting little crosses on the shoes, but by making good shoes because God is interested in good craftsmanship. And if you could carry that into whatever it is that you're attempting to do in this world in terms of life's work, which may be, again, a job, it could be parenting, it could be many things, but whatever it is that you feel called or you're doing in this world, if you could apply that there's something good there that God values, make the connection. Let it become that internal point for you. Number 4, divine wisdom says, don't cheat. Rather, be fair and forthright in your work. This might seem like not surprising, but we need to kind of hear it, especially as it can play out in many ways. In Proverbs 11, it says, God hates cheating in the marketplace. He loves it when business is above board. And cheating is really simple. It's any way that we might engage in the exchange that is in the marketplace in a way that's unfair. So it could be an unfair way that we even fulfill our job, where we're supposed to fulfill it this way, but we don't. We try to cheat it. We try to shortchange our obligations or the expectations. So we're shortchanging whoever's paying us, or you might shortchange the people that you're paying. Any way that we shortchange or cheat or try to exploit, that is really a form of cheating. He says, really, I want it to be fair and forthright. Just do it right in all those kind of exchanges. It also means the way that we work out a product. Do I really provide what I've said I'm to provide, or vice versa? Did I really pay what is fair and forthright in that? And so we go on and hear this analogy given in Proverbs 16. It says, honest scales and balances are from the Lord. All the weights in the bag are of his making. That might seem a little weird, but you probably get the idea that back then the exchange was done with like silver, and so people had to use precious metals to do things in exchange for money. So if I bought something and it was supposed to cost this much silver, how would I know how much? Well, they would carry, the merchants, a bag of rocks, and those rocks were supposed to be representing a certain weight. So they could put the weight on the scale and say, okay, that appears to be this much silver. But if those rocks were not true representations of what they said they were in terms of weight, The measures would be off, and one would be paying too much or too little. And so there's a lot of ways we can work that out, where what we're saying we're providing and vice versa, what we're saying we're paying is not quite what it seems. And the reminder here is to understand that you can play all you want with justice and what's fair. You can play all you want, but in the end, whose bag of rocks is going to count? God's. And really what he sees and what he knows to be true is what's actually going to play out in the long, long term. And he's saying if you understand that, you will live out to that bag of rocks. You will live out to what God sees. And if you don't, you will basically, every time you cheat and the way you operate in the business world will separate you from God. And you'll feel further separated from him if you're not operating in relationship to him, but rather start going, well, he's there, and here's my bag of rocks. Here's my tricks and the way that I approach this. Saying, don't do it. In the end, you will lose. And this is why eventually we read Proverbs 16:8, better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest. Because in the end, being fair is what helps us to live well. We breathe well. We live lightly because we can live before God. We're not living in this pressure and this tension and this separation from him. And wisdom further calls us to be fair with those who have less power. The fifth point is, don't take advantage of those with less. And that is often termed the poor. Listen to Proverbs 22 where it says in verse 16, a person who gets ahead by oppressing the poor or by showering gifts on the rich will end in poverty. And in verse 22, do not exploit the poor because they are poor, and do not crush the needy in court. What is it? Why is this emphasis on the poor? And what's the point being made here? I think that it comes down to this. Don't take advantage of those who you can exploit because they don't have power, because you're really now not operating fairly, and that exploitation will kind of ultimately catch up with you. See, those who don't have the power to be affecting the system of whatever that system is, employees, employers, whatever it may be, they're the ones who can be exploited. So if one has a product and they're trying to serve people with their product, but they know that, well, this demographic, they don't even get to play, they don't have enough money, I don't care about their money because there's not enough of it, I don't care how it affects them. So they may be the ones who get exploited and by labor. We need to care about that. It might be the employee who needs to realize, or the employer who needs to realize, I don't, as I set the way people are compensated, I need to consider the fact that just because I can doesn't mean I should always pay the least. There are times where I need to think about, does this provide enough for this person that I could look them in the eye and say, hey, there's a difference in pay. I have more responsibility, I have had more longevity, but I care about you, and just because I can do something doesn't mean I do it. When we start relating that way, life will flourish better. And so each of us do well to think, how does the way I engage the marketplace, or my trade, or whatever I do, how do I take those into account who have maybe the least power? Those who have the least power to influence me and force themselves. How can I make sure I'm thinking of them? Whatever that might be, how can I be thoughtful of those who have the least? Number 6, develop your potential, your skills and your strengths. One of the things that it wants us to understand is it's not just about effort and energy, it's also about ability, and that's something you can develop. Listen to the words of Proverbs 22:29 where it says, this, do you see any truly competent workers? Well, they will serve kings rather than working for ordinary people. What it seems to suggest is that there's a sense of competency, of higher abilities that one can develop, and that ultimately is going to be rewarded or seen. And we can tend to look down and say, hey, I got this skill, this is what I do, or this simple thing I do, it's what I provide, and just stop there the rest of our lives and think somebody should just appreciate what I do. Yeah, they might at the level you do it. But as you bring more to it, as you're willing to develop yourself, you bring greater contribution, and with greater contribution, there will be greater reward. So it's saying, basically, you should be valuing developing whatever it is you do. That we should be lifelong learners, and that's true in any area of life, whether it's in work or ministry and parenting, in every facet of life. How can I grow in that? How can I be thoughtful, whether I'm going to a seminar or reading or whatever you do? And I know that sounds like, oh gosh, I'm tired of learning. I'm done with school, finished, period. I want to never go back to that kind of learning. But there are different ways that learning can be a rich part of life. At the very end of his life, John Wimber, who some of you know is kind of the father and founder of the Vineyard movement, and so John's up in later years, and people are coming from all over the world, to just hear John speak on leadership. And I was at a leadership gathering with John, and something nobody knew as they're all listening to the sage talk about, leadership, was that John was enrolled in classes at Fuller Seminary at the time for no reason other than his own personal growth. And people thought that is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Like, why would he do that? I mean, he has so little time left on this earth. His answer would be the same as every great leader, which is every great leader is a lifelong learner. You never stop learning. You never stop trying to grow in whatever it is. You just keep adding to your insights through whatever means will serve that best. There's always something to be developing. And finally, number 7, the last point we'll take up today, which is this: find rest in knowing the limitations of work and material rewards. That might seem like kind of an opposite of our first point, which says work hard, but actually we'll see that they're both to be held together. Listen to the words of Proverbs 23. It says, "Don't wear yourself out trying to get rich. Be wise enough to know when to quit. In the blink of an eye, wealth disappears, for it will sprout wings and fly away like an eagle." Well, that doesn't sound very exciting, but a lot of us are going, yeah, I kind of remember something that I thought was so worthwhile, and I worked so hard for it, and it just kind of seemed to flutter away, I've had a few things where I worked really hard, but it just seemed gone, Maybe you worked for a car and it's, you get an accident. Maybe you work for something that deteriorates. Maybe just circumstances change and something that you were putting so much hope in is gone. There's a point in which you put undue hope. You put something upon the hope that you think work's going to provide that is not kept in perspective. It's not fitting. And this is why we're really being encouraged here. Don't become a workaholic. And there's a difference between working hard and being a workaholic. The working hard is work hard to provide well. And generally, that's going to be true. Keep that connection. There's a lot of other connections that get connected with work and that make it kind of addictive to us, where we're overly driven to it, where we connect something and we're going too hard and we lose perspective. One of those might just be importance, where we connect work to importance. And I need to be validated, and I just have such a sense of insecurity deep down or don't feel valid, so I'm constantly working to make a name for myself, to be noticed, to get approval. That can be a driving force that can lead one to work in a way that's not going to be healthy and fruitful. Or maybe it's just for that approval. Maybe you grew up and you never felt really approved and encouraged for who you were. So you love it when you work so hard that the boss has to say, hey, thanks, good job. You worked 120 hours yesterday, And, I got to approve you. Oh, yeah, he approved me. I'll do it again tomorrow. There's a point in which that kind of approval is just not really healthy, and you're just going at it too hard. Or maybe it's that ultimately what seems to be implied here, that financial security, where we're just driven because maybe our family grew up in scarcity, so there was always anxiety. And sometimes even families who have had a lot, and you grew up in a family who was pretty well-to-do, they seemed to have all their needs met, but they still had an anxiety running through the parents. And so we carry this anxiety that we never feel secure enough. Like, I just need to have more. And, you've prepared yourself well, and yet you always feel like a little bit like I need more to feel finally okay. I never quite feel, and you lose perspective. So the only way to feel better is to work more and more and more, because if you're not working, you're probably not securing your life enough. And so you lose perspective, and it's saying know when to quit. Know when to quit. Don't put total dependency that you're going to control everything by pure effort. There's a general principle. Don't lose the principle and the perspective. Does that make sense? And God so wants us to understand, to hold those together. Hard work can provide well, but don't become driven in such a way that you're driven by things that are losing perspective. And it's in this that God so much wants to understand. You are not defined by what you do. What you do is an expression of God's skills, God's gifts, God's potential. He gave us minds and vision and ability to think and hands and energy. He gave us all that. And we have more or less at different stages of life. It's different. You apply yourself different when you're older than when you're younger. But in every stage, you've got things to bring to life. So go for it. Do it. Be all in. But it's not who you are. It doesn't have the final word on you. It doesn't define you. He does. And he wants that to be kept clear. And with that, I just want to invite us to stop and take a moment. Put the list of the 7 up there for a moment. And I encourage you before, and if you haven't, maybe just take a moment now and just say, God, if these are 7, of probably pretty clear points of wisdom that you speak into the human soul in order to flourish in relationship to work, what stands out? What kind of speaks as having a timeliness to me? Maybe not novel or new, but it kind of speaks into something I sense in my life I need to be not just reminded of, I think I need to make some inner change over. I think God wants to help me and speak this afresh to me. I invite you just to take a moment and look, and then I'm just going to invite us just to have a moment to pray and just kind of ask God to further speak to us about that. Let's try to just identify one of those. And now I just want to invite us, would you join me? Let's just take a minute and just kind of bring that before the Lord. You may be one that's like, I don't really pray. I'm not sure where I'm at with God. That's all right. God believes in you. So, you just be honest and just kind of in your own heart, just kind of put it before God and say, speak to me about this. Lead me better. Will you do that? Let's pray.
Thank you for listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles. Tune in for next week's message.